Today I want to tackle the question that I hear a lot, but man, Rick in his 30 plus years of experience hears all the time. And that's the question of, why can't my spouse hear what I'm saying? Another way to say it is actually, why won't my spouse hear me? And here's kind of a good synopsis. The reality is, when I talk to people, one of the first questions I'll ask is, well, how long have you been married, or how long have you been together? Because if you've been married or if you've been together for any length of time, I mean, 5 years, 10, 15, all the way up to some people who've been married 30 years and still encounter infidelity or addiction. When you have that much time together, you no longer have objectivity. The truth of the matter is, you have so many years together. You have built this life. Objectivity is gone. Your spouse, quite frankly, cannot hear you objectively. They can't hear you objectively because you have all this water underneath the bridge. You have all this water of unmet needs and resentment or confusion or misinterpretation or anger or bitterness or the bomb of infidelity. And so to think, after a significant amount of time together, and then the nuclear bomb of infidelity is dropped, if you think as a betrayed spouse that your unfaithful spouse is going to hear you objectively after all their defending and justifying and attacking and excusing, I'm sorry, it just doesn't work that way. Alternatively, if you are an unfaithful spouse and you have been the one that ignited the nuclear bomb, and you think that your betrayed spouse is going to have any capacity to hear you objectively, I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. You see, what happens is, when you, as an unfaithful, are trying to talk to your betrayed spouse, whatever you're saying is being filtered through the fact that you have had an affair or an addiction for God knows how long. They cannot process what you're saying without the backdrop of that information, so it renders them unable to hear you objectively and to take what you are saying, no matter how much truth it may have. They just can't absorb it. Now, alternatively, and this is going to sting a little bit, if you're a betrayed spouse and you're trying to communicate to your unfaithful spouse your feelings, your needs, your triggers, your flooding, your emotions, your struggles, they, as an unfaithful, can't hear you, because what they hear from you, you may not be saying this, but what they are hearing is shame. I'm going to be a doormat the rest of my life. They're never going to forgive me. They'll never be able to get over this. I'm just a worthless piece of crap. I'll never be free from the shackle of the affair that I had, even though it's their fault, because if they'd have done A, B, and C, I would have never had the affair. Now, I'll tell you, this happened to me time and time again with Samantha. I would try and communicate some things. No matter how gracious I was, no matter how delicate I tried to be early on, she couldn't hear me. And as soon as I tried to communicate my needs or my struggles, she would just shut down. And so finally I decided I was going to have it out one day with Rick. Now, this is 11 plus years ago. But I sat down with him and I said, she won't hear me no matter what. Is it any wonder, hold on, is it any wonder I cheated? She won't hear anything I have to say about sex, about intimacy, about feeling like I was a fourth kid, about demeaning and finding encouragement everywhere else but home, etc., etc. And I think Rick had finally reached a point where he was willing to say, game on, sucker. He finally said, Samuel, let me ask you, did you have an affair for 2+ years with Samantha's best friend? I said, yeah, I did. And he said, did Samantha cheat? I said, no. He said, did Samantha have any kind of an affair or go outside the marriage or what have you? No. And all of a sudden there was that voice of shame, and now I was kind of reacting to Rick as a father, and I was like, well, no. And he said, so what soapbox do you have to stand on? I mean, where do you get off? He never raised his voice at me, he never got aggressive. He just very graciously said to me, where do you get off trying to lecture Samantha on what she should have done? He said, if you ever want to mess up your marriage, than should your spouse. What I'll explain is, if you ever want to really cause hurt and pain, either side of infidelity, is say to your spouse, well, you should have this and you should have that. And if you just would understand that if you would have realized that you should have done A, B, and C in that situation, we'd have never had this trouble. That's going to wound them even more, no matter what side of infidelity you're on. But Rick took this moment and he said, if a bad marriage makes spouses cheat, then Samantha should have cheated. You had an affair because, man, you were lost and confused and all these different things he went into, but he said, if you think Samantha's going to hear anything that you have to say until you own it, until you allow the light to be shined on you, until you are safe enough to stop justifying and excusing, she cannot hear you objectively, and she won't. And quite frankly, Samuel, she shouldn't. You see, in many ways, whether it be unfaithful or whether it be betrayed, when we're hurt, when we are dealing with unmet needs, when we are angry, we become so blind that we are unable to hear our spouse objectively. We've got unmet needs. We can replay all the times that we felt like we reached out to our spouse or our partner only to have our hand smacked. We're bitter, we're angry, we're frustrated, we're rejected, and we become blind. And the only way through it is to, I think, step back and do just a few things. Number one is you've got to stop playing this game of find the bad guy. Well, you should have this. Well, if you would have that. And if you would stop doing this, and if you would stop doing that, and if you would just this, because you're the bad guy. You got to stop playing find the bad guy. Number two, you've got to get to a safe place with expert help so that the expert third party can say some things to your spouse that you just can't say. I'll never forget the way I saw Rick navigate a few very difficult situations with Samantha in a way where Samantha really absorbed it, received it, and then later said to me, do you think I was A, B, or C? And at that point I was able to say, yeah, honey, I do think so. And it was so redemptive, so restorative, it absolutely changed our marriage. You see, when you get into a safe place with experts who know how to communicate these things, they can say some things in a way that would never be received by your spouse if they came from you, but they're coming from an expert third party who it becomes far more palatable and far more acceptable, and the timing of it creates the opportunity for the information to be received. Change begins to happen. And your life, slowly but surely, can find a measure of restoration that you would have never found if you keep playing find the bad guy and trying to attack each other. You see, I was a master at argument and debate, and so I could pin Samantha in a corner to the point where she would even look up and have to take a step back at the complete pile of BS that I was trying to trap her with. And she finally refused to get into those moments unless we were in a situation where Rick or one of our mentors could mediate. When you give due process to recovery, you'll be amazed. You cannot rush it. If you're unfaithful, you're going to have to surrender to the process of allowing the light to be shined upon you for a temporary amount of time and prove that you are safe and big enough to own those things. Not berating, not humiliating, not demeaning constantly. That's not going to work. It's only going to push the unfaithful spouse away further. But as you own your part and surrender to the process, you will then create space for the expert third party to begin to say, now, betrayed spouse, do you think there's any validity to some of the struggles that unfaithful spouse has shared? Not in a way to justify the affair, but to prove that it is just simply valid as an individual to do recovery work for you.